Some general housekeeping before we begin. Each webinar will be recorded. Once the series has concluded, the recordings will be posted on the Lethbridge County YouTube channel and the Lethbridge County website. A link to the recordings will be sent out to all participants in case you'd like to review the sessions or were unable to participate in one or more of the presentations. This year, also, we have the series being presented on Rogers TV here in Lethbridge, so that's kind of exciting. Any questions that you have can be typed in the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen and will be answered once both presentations have been completed. Please feel free to utilize the chat just to get a general sense of where everyone is from. If you wouldn't mind posting what town, province, and state you're in the chat, it'd be greatly appreciated. We do have CEU credits available for each presentation. QR codes will be shown at the end of the session today. All you'll need is the Certified Crop Advisor app that will allow you to scan the received credits for today's presentation. If anyone does have any troubles, just let me know, myself or Maddie, and we'll help you out in any way we can. Lastly, the webinar is scheduled for 1 hour each day. We will certainly extend it if we need to accommodate for any questions. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first panelist today, Scott Gillespie, who will discuss cover crop clarity, simplifying selection for Alberta's farming realities. So Scott has nearly 2 decades of experience in dryland and irrigated specialty crop agriculture in southern Alberta, Canada. He has always been interested in blending the practices of organic and conventional agriculture. All his jobs have been focused on agronomy without product sales, and so that is why he has focused his company, Plants Dig Soil Consulting, on realistic regen ag, which is advice without the pitch. Scott has his Bachelor of Science in Agriculture with a focus in agronomy from the University of Guelph, and his Master of Science with a focus in plant science from the University of Manitoba. Along with Certified Crop Advisor status, he is also registered with the Alberta Institute of Agrologists as a professional agrologist. So welcome, Scott.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I'm going to get the screen shared here. So hopefully you're seeing it.
Looks good.
Okay. So I'm going to get right into the presentation here about cover crops for the prairies. There we go. So the big question right now is, are cover crops a good idea? And I have these two points here about our current situations under dryland. We're in the midst of a multi-year drought, and with irrigation, the water restrictions are looking likely for this coming season. So are cover crops a good idea? So I'm going to spend a fair amount of time on this study that I came across that explains a lot of things for me in how I go about looking at cover crops now. So it's a paper that is a meta-analysis, which means that they take as many studies as possible and put them together or standardize the data to try to look at the bigger picture of what's been coming out in research on cover crops. So this one here is specifically looking at the legacy impacts of soil, water, and nitrogen, and the crop yields in dryland situations. So some of you might have been trying to read that as quick as you can while I have it up here, but I'm going to be going through it in detail over the next many slides, summarizing the key points from it that I see. Yeah, you can always, actually that link that's on the bottom there, you can either, your phone might be able to get it right now, or it can always be sent out later, or if it's in the slides later, you can find it. But it's an open access article that anybody can see. So this is their key points from it. Background is that most successes of cover crops are in areas that have sufficient or excess rain. And in these cases, so I'm going to be talking about fallow in a moment. So in these cases, they are comparing fallow to cover crop. So in these cases, fallow is usage of the cover crop can help in these situations. And I have fallow in quotes there because it's a little different than what we might think of in our fallow. So fallow at least in this study, is any period where plants could grow when the cash crop is not. So in a wet areas, this could be the shoulder seasons, which is late fall, early spring. And in some cases, it can almost be all winter. That there either can be something growing or at least green at that point. And in dry areas, this could be the shoulder season, or it could be the entire calendar year, which is more of what we think of as fallow here. But anyway, the key point is that they're comparing, but they're basically comparing what happens if you plant a cover crop versus what happens if you don't. And they're trying to summarize the studies. So why cover crops have become this big thing over the last 5 or 10 years, and even longer, but really the really big hype on them has been in the last 5 to 10 years. Fallow conserves 30% of the water at best, or at least, I guess, under normal circumstances, that's about how much water. And what they're saying is that's the amount of water that is conserved that actually goes through the plant. So it increases nitrogen by breakdown of organic matter. So this is good for getting nutrients, but it's bad for the soil in the long term because you are losing your organic matter to free up these nutrients. And then fallow increases salts that are drawn up by evaporation. So the concept is to run some of the lost water, which is about 70% would be your maximum, but at least run some of that through the plant instead. So this is kind of the whole promise of cover crops, or what the idea behind them is that the plant will put some sugars and energy into the system because you've got a living plant there. There'll be either less organic matter loss or some increase. It'd be probably about equal. You'll have the plant putting energy into the system and feeding the microbes, and then it will die, and then they will break things down. But then in the very least, you shouldn't be losing organic matter. If it's a legume, it could contribute some nitrogen to the soil. And then the key thing is that it's not going to draw up salts when it's killed. Or at least it's not going to draw up salts when it's growing, and then when it's killed, it will leave a mulch on the surface and hopefully should help to retain moisture. So it's a great idea, but the question always is, does it work? There are many studies published all the time with results of trying out cover crops in different environments. Some show gains, some show losses. And often studies are published often studies with no effect don't get published. And this is one of the problems that I've come across in science, is that sometimes things don't get published when nothing really happens. But they should be published because sometimes that can give you ideas for other things. And one good example that I've seen is that the irrigated crop update, Grabir from Farming Smarter talked about strip till. And so that's where you're trying to incorporate, or you're leaving your field mostly no-till, but then you're just doing some tillage where you're going to plant the seed. And there wasn't huge effects either way in terms of moisture or temperature, or even how the crop grew in the strip till areas. And so in some ways, it seems like it doesn't really make sense to use it. But when you do get a big wind event come up, then that strip till is going to do a whole lot better than a tillage system. And this would be more suited to things like sugar beets or seed canola, or maybe even dry beans, where you're using a planter, or where you're needing to have a nicer seed bed than just what a no-till planter can do. So I'd already talked about this, but what they did, they pulled together and standardized the data, and they grouped together all kinds of explainer variables and reading the paper, they do go through many different things. Like they looked at when the cover crop was killed, or in terms of like when it was terminated, the different types of cover crops that could be used, and that. But the one thing that really stuck out was annual precipitation. And so I'm going to go through how that affects the water, the nitrogen, and then the yield. So here's here's this very nice summary that summarizes massive amounts of work that they put into this. Like in terms of, like, they go through the methods, like the amount of literature searching and standardizing data and doing everything that they could to try to get a clear picture. Comes down to three main charts, at least for me. So on this side here, on the left side, is annual precipitation in millimeters. And then I put in the inches, because a lot of us still think in inches when we're looking at things. And so you should know this, but in our region, 12 inches, less than 12 inches would be in more of where I am, like in the Tabor, Scandia, Rolling Hills area would be a typical, what we would expect, you know, and it'd be a little bit more in Lethbridge, in maybe up to 14 inches what you'd expect. But so we're looking at this area, and especially in these last few years, when I think it's only been about 8 inches if you look at the entire year. So you've probably noticed that it's all negative, that the soil water is less than zero than what would be if you didn't plant a cover crop. So first, just before we get too much into it, this N number here is the number of studies that were included, or the number of trials that were in there. So then that, of course, the higher the number, the better. So 178 that's a huge amount of studies that have been put in here. This p-value is it's a way that the statistics can tell us the probability of a response. And so usually when it's less than 0.05, so if the 5 was there, they'd consider it to be significant. So that means it's 95% chance that you're correct. So in this case, it's 99.99% chance that the number is within this range here. So they're saying that when you come to plant your cash crop after using a cover crop, you can expect that this would be about 23% less water, with a range of, I think, about 18 to 28% loss. The interesting thing is, you'll see here that this, when you go up a little bit in water in this grouping here, it's not quite as big of a loss, which you would kind of expect. But then the funny thing is, this one goes back over again when you get into these higher precipitation values, or higher water values. So the authors did say that they're in these particular regions, or in these particular studies, it could have been that there might have been more studies where they were allowing winter crops or winter cover crops to go longer to actually use moisture to make it easier to plant in. But then it's interesting here, it goes back up again when you get into higher rainfall areas. And you can see this one here, it's still about an 8% loss. But there is quite a range there in how much you'd lose. But still, and also the authors say that in these studies here, these larger, when you're into high rainfall areas, that was actually probably the goal, was to try to have less water at the planting time to make it easier to plant. Now, just a moment, something's got in the way of my controls. There we go. So here's the nitrogen. And you can see it's, there's less studies. So then less studies that included a nitrogen component in this particular area. And so there's a bigger range in values, but it's still pretty significant because this is showing about 30 to 60% less nitrogen in low rainfall areas where you use cover crops. Similar pattern here where there's not as big of a change there in this region, a little bit bigger or a fairly big change there. And then this one here is included, but it's actually, you really can't draw much conclusions from this because there's only 3 studies and it's a massive range. So, and even this p-value is saying only that would be 74% chance that there is an effect going on there, or 76% chance that there is an effect going on there. So maybe in these areas, in the higher rainfall areas, you might not lose as much nitrogen from leaching, and so you might actually do better than normal, but it's hard to tell. But it's fairly clear from these ones here that you have less nitrogen, which may not be a bad thing. If you have excess nitrogen, you might want to be getting it soaked up by a cover crop. And then the one that everybody's most interested in is the yield. And so here, again, in this low rainfall area, which we would be in for the last few years and are historically would be in still in this category or at the very bottom of this category, they're saying that they found over 59 studies that the average was a 30% loss in yield, and the range is anywhere from I guess that'd be 13 or 14% to about 44% loss. So pretty significant when you're in a low rainfall area. It's better in these areas. It's not as much of a loss, but still that's between the 7 and 8% loss when you're looking at incorporating cover crops in. Now, this might be able to be mitigated by adding more nitrogen. If nitrogen was your limiting factor, if it took up the nitrogen and you didn't account for that, you might be able to bring your yield up in this. But again, but then the problem is that you've also put your money into cover crop seed and everything and managing that. And if you had to have more nitrogen just to get the same or maybe a lower yield, it's hard to it's hard to sell that, or it's hard to do that when it doesn't seem like there's much of a gain. And then in these higher precipitation areas, then this is where it's interesting. There, like it's showing about a 7 or 8% gain, but there is enough of a spread that they can't be entirely sure, because it would be that 92% sure that's there, because if there's just a little bit kind of crossing over that 0. So it's meaning that they're fairly certain that you're going to get some type of a gain. In the very least, you shouldn't lose anything by doing cover crops in a high rainfall area. Now I was interested in this and I thought this was an interesting study, but then I heard, I had people comment that there's a lot of successful cover croppers out there in the Midwest, and that they're making it work. So they couldn't understand how or they were questioning the study because they said that there's a lot of people making it work. So I plotted out the popular ones that I've heard of a lot. And if anybody else has other ones, we can try to plot them out here too as to where they are. So I got this map. I was very fortunate. I found this really nice looking map from Oregon State University, and I just plotted out where these people are. So here we are in the very dry area, just north of the border. If you notice, everybody should know Gabe Brown, or everybody's probably heard of Gabe Brown at this point. He is right on that border of the 16 to 20 and 20 to 24. So you could probably say he's in the 20-inch of annual precipitation. This Jimmy Evans or Emmons, is little further. Let's see here. That would be he's right on the border of the 20 to 24 and 24 to 28. So again, 24 inches of precipitation. And so he is making it work, but he's getting more precipitation than what we're used to. Now, of course, he has more chances of evapotranspiration there, or evaporation too, because of the heat. But still, it's a fair amount of moisture he's getting. And then as you go across, you can see these ones into the wetter areas. And then these ones in here are right on that 36 to 40 inch, or even right into the 40 inch of rain in a year. And just as a interesting note, I grew up in Ontario, and I grew up like, right around in there. And growing up, I didn't think it had rained. I didn't think it rained a lot. I just knew what rain was. I didn't realize it had rained. We were in that high of a precipitation area. But I can tell you this winter, from talking to my dad at home, it just keeps raining. I think he even said they had 3 or 4 inches of rain this past week. So it just keeps raining and raining, and tile drains keep running through. So it's a very different area when you're dealing with rain and soils that get completely saturated. So, so where do we go from here? This was, I've got a fair number of slides that go through different ideas for different contexts. So, dry land, this is what I say is do not plant cover crops in a multi-year drought. You just, from that evidence, and I think even just grower experience, when it's hard enough to grow a cash crop, then you shouldn't be trying to grow cover crops as well. Now, so I guess there's two kind of, maybe not exceptions, but different ideas to think about. So be ready in a wetter cycle. If it does change, you could look at planting something after harvest. You could plant warm season annuals in a fallow year. Say if it does get really, say if it just rains in June, and you've got a chance, then maybe you can plant something in that summer period and get some growth and get a little bit more than just a fallow. But keep in mind, as I said, with that amount of precipitation it takes, it still is not a guarantee that you're going to gain out of it. If you're looking at grazing, or if you can graze, then that can make a big difference in the economics of it. And that's where a person like Gabe Brown makes a huge difference that he's grazing. He's not just growing cover crops and letting them die. He's using them as animal feed. And I just have the note in there, don't overgraze it and leave it as a big brown soupy mess going into winter, because that's going to be counterproductive if you do that. Species selection, just one legume plus a cereal, or using annual ryegrass. You don't need anything too fancy to go in there. I would just grow what you can in there. That's a whole other talk, or that's a whole other topic, is just the diversity that is required. And when you're looking at shorter periods, and I guess lower potential, then you definitely want to just pick the best one for the job. Clovers don't seem to grow well here. They just, especially when they're planted in the heat of the summer, they just don't grow well. Skip the legume. If you're planting a pulse crop the next year, then you may not want to put a legume in, because you got a crop that can do that already for you. And this is something too, don't use a pulse cover crop if you grow them in your rotation, because the disease issues are a concern. It's not known exactly whether it's going to increase the disease, but I don't think it's going to lower your disease. So you want to be careful what you put out there. This picture is just volunteer barley on potato rows. So this is under irrigation. this prioritize any situation where the soil may blow. So when you're marking out hills that are going to sit all winter, this has been, people have been doing this, experimenting with it for a few years now, and it's been working very well. It, the biggest thing is, I'll bring up the next 2 points, labor and machinery, because everybody's used to doing the row marking after harvest, but it has to be done in August for this to actually work. The experience so far is that it's been minimal issues when planting in the spring, as long as it winter kills, or as long as you have something out there that winter kills. This is an emerging area of research, is disease control. On the east coast of Canada, there's buckwheat has been shown to lower wireworm issues in potatoes. There is some research underway here, but the issue again, or the cautions are that they're using full season covers, and the effects show after a few cycles of potatoes and cover crops and such. And also they're very high moisture, so they have lots more growing potential. With under irrigation, again, any situation where it may blow, so under potatoes and sugar beets, spreading before digging or seeding immediately can work. To me, it's the cheapest cereal, which could be your own seed that you put out there. Oats might grow faster than barley or wheat, but I wouldn't worry about it too much. Just use what you have. Winter cereals can work, but if they don't cover the ground as fast, and actually Allison Davey talked about this at the irrigated crop update, was just doing a mixture of the two, where you put some barley out that grows really fast and holds or grabs the soil quickly, and then the winter wheat can overwinter and hold it through through this period right now. So after harvest, this is a after harvest with potatoes, you can look at trying to plant a winter cereal for grain. It's usually successful, but it has to be planted in by mid to late September to have a real chance to grow. It is a good option if you can be ready right there with the equipment. It can be planned on using it for animal feed, which could be grazed or silage, but so that part wouldn't be high water use, but there are people that they silage and then they put something else in right away, but that's going to use a lot of water this coming year. Now, this is an idea that I'm curious to see if it would work here, is interseeding a cover crop between the rows before canopy closure. There's been work in North Dakota where it has worked fairly well. I did try a little plot of it this year, just scratching in some stuff, but the problem was the sugar beets just overtook it too fast and never really grew. The idea would be you'd have an understory growing once the canopy yellows off, and have less chance of it blowing, but let's see here. The timing has been tough. That's one of the issues. Too much growth and it cuts the yield, too little, and it's not really worth the work on it. There's some option that could be done on this with interseeding in sugar beets, but I think more local work needs to be done on it. So this here, prioritizing again with using where it could blow, sugar beets and seed canola with nurse crops. Winter cereals, if you know you're going to be into that field, you could do it the year before, but then that's always seems to be a challenge. Spring cereals, sometimes you get them out too early, sometimes they get out too late. And in this case here, it was a little spray miss, just where the sprayer hiccuped, and you can really see the impact of the nurse crop going too long in smothering the canola. Dry beans. This one, either seeding between the windrows immediately is one option. I'll just bring up the next one, is flying it on prior to windrowing. You'll end up with green strips or residue strips, but and then with the flying on, sometimes it's a little sporadic, and you're not irrigating afterwards. But you have to decide what's worse, is kind of looking at a messy looking field or risking having your field blow. And again, it's cereals are going to be your best choice in that. And I don't want to go into Andrew's time too long, so I'll just go over this quickly. This is an interseeding option to extend your grazing opportunities between corn or between silage corn. This is an option, but again, it's going to be one of those ones where in a water limited year, you may not want to be having to try to use up your water later on. And this one here, this is where I think the future is, or where we could be looking at it when we don't have water restrictions. You could be trying to use a little bit more of that time in August and September to grow something after cereals. And I am going to be writing some stuff for the Lethbridge paper, or the county paper again, to expand on this. So I'll go into more detail when I get to that. So here's the summary. On dry land, do not plant cover crops unless the drought breaks. Under irrigation, even under water restrictions, erosion is still a priority. You have to figure out a way to not let soil blow. This 27-inch rule, it's an interesting one. I think it's something to think about as you read stuff or think about stuff or see people talking about things. If they're in a high precipitation area, yes, then cover crops are going to work for them, or they can work for them. But it's a much tougher thing in our area. So fit them in when you can. They do work in the long term. We just have to find ways to make them work or pay in the short term. So with that, that's just a screenshot of my website, and you can find me here, or just search out the name of the company. You'll find me. So. Oh, there's Matt. Okay.
Oh, that was great, Scott. Thank you so much for that. So we'll get right into Andrew here. So our next panelist, Andrew Manns, will present on nutrient management in organic farming. Andrew is an organic farmer growing field and greenhouse vegetables and cover crops near Coaldale, Alberta. His passion lies in regenerative agriculture with the intent of having the farm produce healthy food while improving the soil and the farm's ecosystem. He feels that the regenerative approach to farming is sustainable, profitable, and enjoyable. Welcome, Andrew.
Good morning. I will just get a share going here. All right, I think we should be there.
Good to go.
All right, perfect. Well, good morning. Yeah, I'm Andrew Manns with Manns Organics. So we're Southern Alberta under irrigation, and been organic for a while. So just, yeah, we've been a certified organic farm since 2007. We are definitely what I term a small farm, 100 acres of irrigated land. We run veggies in 1 acre of greenhouse and about 30 acres of field vegetables. We mostly are wholesale, so we directly deal with produce managers in our natural foods, organic food stores. Calgary and Edmonton is a lot of our market. Family farm, 8 full-time employees. And yeah, in the greenhouse, it's typically kind of the vine crops, the higher yielding tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, eggplant. And we've started growing some ginger and turmeric. And our staples for the field are onions, shallots, garlic, some cantaloupe, and some rhubarb. This is an overhead shot of our farm. So we have 2 smaller pivots, and we tend to split our fields into what we call pies, where we do our smaller operations. This is just a picture here from several years back, wide variety on a given day of what we all had coming off the farm. So yeah, jumping into the nutrition. So one of the thoughts or one of the things that we've been asked more often is kind of it seems like the general sense is that as an organic farmer, you don't have, nutritional tools. And I think it's, not really fair. I think we have lots of tools. They're just very different. And it's kind of learning and understanding. So on this picture, you're seeing two pictures here. One is what we call an extractor, or where we're actually extracting vermicompost, as well as we use this tool to inject things like micronized gypsum. So if we want to apply, for example, 200 pounds per acre of micronized gypsum, we can use our liquid system here and continuously do that. So it's different than the conventional fertilizer system, but we do have a lot of tools. Actually, on that note, we probably have about 60 different inputs that we have on farm that we can use for working with our crops. We do have a bit of a history of some manure. We had my dad had a small background in feedlot for years as I was growing up here on the farm. And so some manure applications at the time. And in the past 10 years, we've had a couple of applications where we did compost, where we actually composted a blend of chicken manure and feedlot bedding pack. So we have some compost history, and currently actually our nutrition in our field soils is quite decent. So we're not looking for anything in big amounts of nutrition. We're just looking to tweak and to manage the soil. So that's kind of where we're at on the base. On the other side here, this is actually a tote of spring wheat seed. So we're no longer growing spring wheat. We're just focusing on field vegetables and working with our cover crops in between. But we grew spring wheat for a number of years, and one of our methods there was to actually do a biological inoculant with some nutrition, liquid through an auger, just on a smaller scale again, because we were seeding anywhere from 30 to 40 acres. So several totes full of seed, and we were coating the seed with a liquid and allowing that would dry up fairly quick, and then that would go through the drill. So just another tool that we had. This picture here is actually a blend of species for not so much a cover crop. This one was actually combined for a neighbor who was looking for a chicken feed blend. So he had an idea, and we blended, it was some wheat and some green peas, some sunflowers, buckwheat, vetch, there was phacelia, everything mixed together. And we actually grew it together and put it through the combine, and he fed straight there. So it wasn't even a requirement to do any seed separation. So it's something specialty again, but I just wanted to throw that out there as an option okay, we can grow spring wheat and we can irrigate in standard practice, but if we can grow polyculture, why not? And it was kind of neat to see. It was actually interesting watching the different species, I call it, interacting, where we also had spring wheat that year, but we could see the spring wheat in this mix was later maturity than the spring wheat on its own, and other things in here seemed to be accelerated. So it was almost like the crops worked together. We had a lot of success with it, and it was actually very, very close to a perfect blend for chickens. So it was a one-off, but throwing the idea out there. I think every farm, you be creative and have fun and kind of get some advantage while you can. Another set of pictures. So we do have a sprayer, and we do a fair bit of foliar nutrition applications. It's we do a lot of sap analysis. I send typically every 3 weeks through the entire season, greenhouse growing season. So we're doing approximately 120 sap analysis per year. We're sending those over to Holland. I take the leaf sample on Monday morning, ship it off, and Friday morning I have the results. And usually Friday we'll do, if necessary, we'll do foliar application for any adjustments or tweaks that we want to do. So we use that theory in the greenhouse, but also on the field crops, a little bit on wheat, as you see in the picture there, but also in the greenhouse especially. The other picture here on the other side, that's tine harrow. So that was a a weed control pass. That's quite a few years ago, but that was a weed control pass in spring wheat. So it looks quite devastating, but we had very good success with controlling weeds at the right stage. The crop, it kind of looks like you're taking the crop out, and it's definitely stressful. But if it stays dry within another day or two, most of the wheat is poking through. You can definitely, you know, do a number to the wheat, but yeah, we've had some really good successes with something as simple as like that, a blind harrow pass. It's definitely, you need to learn the techniques, speed, angle, pressure. You know, you get the hang of it with a little bit of trial and error. A couple more shots from the farm. So we have one of the techniques we have here for weed control. This is actually flame weeding prior to onion emergence. So we seed our onions about mid to third week of April. And then just before they're coming up, we like to go by and burn off any of the weeds that have already emerged. In the past, I had some sheep. We currently just have some cows. So we definitely have some grazing impact for what cover crops we may have standing for the fall and summer. But mostly I'm using the animals to keep my freezers full. Up top here, we have a picture of my penetrometer, and this is in the greenhouse underneath the crop, a lot of diversity, but penetrometer is a really good tool to have and get accustomed to using, because I definitely believe that compaction is a really large issue facing, you know, most farms, and it can kind of give you an idea. It varies by season, varies by moisture. There's always you know, things to be aware of, but if you have one and you check here and there through the season, you'll definitely get an understanding of what the soil compaction is, and that will give you an idea of where biology may or may not be able to function given how tight the soil is, and also if you have compaction layer or just general compaction. You know, we know 300 psi is kind of the limit for a lot of roots, and less than that yet for biology. So just something to be aware of. I should actually have put a picture in where it's not all the way in the ground. This is ideal scenario in the greenhouse. I don't have that in my field crops, but that's a goal. Here's just one of our nice pictures of a spring wheat crop several years ago. I always do like to say we've had spring wheat crops. We've had good ones and we have had poor ones. Now that's probably like farmers, but just sometimes I like to say, well, you know, I could prove it. We had spring wheat yields up in our best crop was 105 bushel, 14.5% protein crop. But our worst crop was 50 bushels. So, and that's all under irrigation. So a little bit, maybe organic farming wise, maybe a little more sporadic, a little less, you could say, predictable, a little more variation in yields. Typically quality was okay. Usually didn't have a problem with that. And actually on that note, one thing I'd like to point out too, is that we generally don't have a nitrogen problem. Nitrogen, I do not believe, is usually the holdup to crop production. It kind of seems to be one of the questions. Well, what do you do about nitrogen? But we tend to, when the system is so to speak functioning from a soil health and biology prospect, we generally aren't seeing nitrogen deficiencies, or I don't believe that nitrogen is our holdup. I believe it's more about a general balance of nutrition and keeping enough calcium available, and using things like boron, which we're tending to be a little low on. But yeah, the nitrogen just doesn't seem to be the holdup when we've been in the system for this many years. Yeah, there's a picture of some roots. So these are some oats from a cover crop. Liking to see that, you know, seeing the evidence, I guess, that, you know, a healthy plant is feeding the soil, and getting to some of those places where we're seeing good aggregation in soil. We know we can catch and retain moisture for you know, nutrient retention and cycling. So backing up a little bit more, maybe we do use, and I sometimes say cover crop, but it's also a green manuring technique, and it's as you've heard from Scott earlier, but it's very much a context thing. So we are sometimes now, because we're not growing spring wheat, we're focusing our efforts on vegetables. We have places on the farm that will not see vegetables of any sort for 2 years. So we will do 2 years where we plant a blend of cover crop in mid to May, May 15, May 20th is kind of our targeted date. We'll get in one tillage pass for weed control before that. We'll plant a species, kind of like a 10, 12, 14 species cover crop mix. Oats and peas being what I call the main two ingredients, and the rest being what I call the spices. So oriental mustard, buckwheat, phacelia, some millet, some sorghum, sunflowers, lower rates of those. But yeah, we seed that May 15th to May 20. We let it grow. Obviously, we're under irrigation. By about the third week of July, we're terminating. And we've basically come to the conclusion that the tiller, that's a smaller one. We have a bigger one now, but a rototiller is actually a very good tool, because what it allows us to do is only go to about 1 to maybe even 2 inches depth. But it chops up the crop. It's nearly 100% kill, very, very good kill, and relatively, it's not fast, but we can still do 3.5 or so miles per hour. And but this way it's only one pass, so we can get that crop killed with one pass. What we'll generally do then is give it about a week or 10 days, make all the plants have died, and then we'll usually give it some water with the pivot, and this way that extra moisture fires up the biology, and they start digesting the crop, and the worms come back up. So this is probably more of a green manuring type of operation than cover crop, and definitely reliant on water again, so the control of having the water. So if we are in a real water shortage scenario, which could be happening this year, we will probably be at least rethinking the strategy there. So I'm not sure, but or the other thing, what we'll do is, what we have found in the past is the growth and the amount of biomass is very largely dependent on water. So cover crop will grow. If you don't give it much water, you don't get that much biomass. You can still treat it the same way. But if you give it, maybe what we would almost say a surplus of water, give it lots of water, it'll just generate a lot more biomass. So it's kind of a balance there. Well, do you have the water? Do you need the biomass? It definitely, for us, obviously takes, second place for water demand compared to the veggies that are, paying the bills. But given that veggies are high value, and we want clean fields. That was another part of going to more cover crops and tilling through the season, is we're looking to stay quite clean. Now, I'm not saying we had big weed problems growing spring wheat, but if a couple of weeds go through the combine, those couple of weeds, when we're coming by and we're hand weeding onions with a crew of 3 people at a cost of $1,500 an acre, any weed is kind of too expensive. So that was part of our strategies. We're really focusing on quality and cleanliness of fields for vegetable production. So that's another strategy between. And then we back to the cover crop end. Once that crop has been August 8, 7, 8 to 15, that week, that's the window to that we plant what we call our fall cover crops. And as Scott mentioned, we're in southern Alberta. We're largely about erosion for those. So we're seeding only species that will be killed by the winter, partly because we're organic and we don't want to have the concern of trying to kill something that survived the winter. But for me, it's that fall cover crop, and that cover for the winter is literally a fact of sleeping well. It's just, when we have that in, we know the land is not going to blow. That's number 1, 2, and 3 reasons on the list there. And we get some grazing, and I have 5 cows and a couple of heifers, so over a whole winter long, they can cover quite a few acres yet. So we're getting some impact, but yeah, wind erosion is a big concern. This is something we tried in one of our spring wheat crops. When we did our harrowing pass for weed control that I showed earlier, we actually went with a broadcaster, and we broadcasted some clovers and Italian ryegrass on, and it did establish. We combined it later in the year, and I thought, wow, it's green. This is going to be incredible. And it was actually disappointing how little things grew, at least in the fall. It was green, it was alive, so I'm sure there was a benefit. Whether it really was an economical benefit, I'm not sure. We did this one year, that was towards the end of us growing spring wheat, but what we found which ended up being a little bit of a challenge, was that the Italian ryegrass and some of the clover, of course, but the Italian rye survived the winter, and it was a bit of a challenge. I actually took a forage cut off the next spring, and then we terminated it. But yeah, spring or termination of things like rye or anything that overwinters is definitely a concern. So we typically stick with species that will be killed by the winter. Here's another picture of that that crop growing through. And at the time, I wasn't doing as much grazing. I had some sheep then, but not the cows, so not as much grazing effect there. This is a picture of in the greenhouse where we've got soil cover and amounts of biology. So just to point out here, you can see the drip lines on the right side. Those drip lines are being completely covered by worm castings. So we have a history of some vermicompost applications, but when you have a tremendous amount of worms and other biology happening, they digest and recycle a lot of nutrition, and so much activity to the amount that 3/4 inch drip lines are being covered from the beginning to the end of a greenhouse season. There's another little shot of that on the right. You've got some more. Just and the other thing is plants love worm castings. They will just root right into that material if it's wet, that is. And with the drip lines, any of those locations, they grow vigorously from it. And the same thing there. We're just, you know, anything. It's not only a biological situation. There's chemistry, there's biology, there's physics. So we want, you know, the soil structure, the physical aspect of it. We want the worms to be happy. We do need, you know, the base of chemistry there too. But if we can tie those three things together as much as possible, I think that's the, you know, ultimate function of soil. You know, getting plants healthy to actually feed and build that soil too. It's not just working directly on the soil and you know, here comes a healthy plant. It's, well, if we have a plant, we can make that, you know, try to work with that plant to make it healthy and thus grow more healthy soil as well, right? With plants, sugars going in the soil and whatnot. Another couple of shots from the greenhouse. So I do believe in diversity, other roots in the ground. It's not a hardcore science. I do a lot of things. We do things differently. There's no real example for us to follow. In the center here is actually a ginger intercrop with bell peppers. Otherwise, we're planting a variety of flower species, or even you could say cover crops again, sometimes over the winter. Or we even just let things grow if we're coming in with transplants, if other things are growing that aren't in the way. As long as it's not affecting our production and our physical working with crops, then we sometimes say, hey, there's nothing wrong with it, let it go. So, and I've got a little slide here with some resources, some things to spark your idea and imagination. And yeah, I think I kind of ran through that, but that's the gist of what we do. So maybe I'll pass it back to Matt and we'll go from there.
No, thanks, Andrew. That was one of the reasons why I wanted to grab you this year is because I don't know much about organic farming myself. So that was super informative, and just to see what you guys do is that was good. With you, Scott, too, like we're like, so the Lethbridge County this year, or I guess last year, we started doing a soil erosion video, and it's had a bunch of organizations involved and several producers. And one of the things we were looking at is soil erosion with sugar beets, and the ones like they've noted too, like it's very difficult to get that cover crop in, especially depending on the time of season, or the weather. And this year I talked to a few and they said, oh, we could have done it this year, but you don't know what the weather is going to present. So that's, yeah, it's an interesting time.
Mm-hmm.
But so we do have some questions. If anybody does have any questions, please be sure to put them in the Q&A and we'll get to the majority of them. The first one we have here is this is for you, Scott. Is there any indication of what shorter grower season does to response of crop?
Yeah, that's there. Yeah, what a shorter growing season does. Yeah, actually, it is kind of an interesting. It's an interesting question, or an interesting thing to think about, because like down in in Kansas, I think it's it might be 16 to 20 inches of rain, and they consider that to be dry land. But they also have the so much more heat and so much more chances for that moisture to disappear. So that it does change things in how things are going to grow. And then even with so say as you go further north, they can they're fortunate because then they have more moisture and less of a grow or less heat. So then they actually kind of match up their season a little bit better. But yeah, the cover crops will change according to what your growing season is. And I think that's maybe is why, like I talked about the clover just doesn't seem to want to grow here well. There's been a lot of people try it and it's been very tough to get it to work as a cover crop. And that's kind of one of the issues is that something will work great in one area and then you bring it to another area and it just doesn't want to work. So.
Interesting. Andrew, I got a question for you here. Have you looked into using the laser weeder or similar type of tool in your organic system?
Yeah, we actually, a year and a half ago, there was a demonstration here and it was Carbon Robotics, and they have a laser weeding system, and it's, we are not using one, and it's economics at this point. It's nice to see or to know basically that the technology, they're selling units. There's, the organic lettuce or various organic operations in like Arizona and California. They've widely adopted it. There is a grower in Southern Alberta for organic onions that did buy a machine. They're just vastly expensive, and for our 7 acres of onions and 15 acres of garlic, it's just, we can't afford it yet. And what we've said is they're building basically a machine that does a blanket of, I think it's 20 feet wide, while we're very much adapted to row crop type cultivations and weed control operations. So what we feel like they should do is adapt a machine that can do, let's say, 6-inch or 8-inch strips, where we could just buy 3 row units and use them on what we call one bed and still continue our basically relatively cost effective inter-row cultivations, but not have this huge capital expense. So yeah, technology is there, and potentially at some point labor costs keep seeming to go up, and the cost of equipment might come down if it's more widely adopted, or technology, they do more mass production. But yeah, it's there. Just economics, I would say, is number one why we're not able to afford it yet.
Yeah, I got a question for you here, and I saw you typed in there, or you're asking them. Wasn't sure if you were able to answer them there, but we'll put it on here anyways.
Right, yeah.
What type of cover crop mixture can be profitable to grow them in drought year period that we are encountering as a near normal since last 7 years or so?
Yeah, and I'd sent a private message to try to get a little more context for it, because I don't know where where that is, but really that's kind of what the argument of what I put out was, that really when you're in a drought like this and when you have so little moisture, it really I don't think there is a cover crop mixture that is profitable to grow in a dry, when it's so dry. Like if you're struggling to even grow a cash crop, or you're getting low yields in a cash crop, then a cover crop is not going to do well. The only way would be is if you can take a fallow year and grow a cover crop but again, if you in this type of weather, if you only just grow a cover crop, maybe you get some grazing out of it, maybe you get something else out of it, but I just don't think that's going to be more profitable. That's the issue right now, is that it's just such a it's such a tough growing environment right now for it. And actually, like what Andrew said too, like the water drives the biomass. And so like as Andrew was saying, like if you you can grow you can grow a cover crop or get something growing there, but it's really the biomass, like the size of it, because the size above ground correlates to the size below ground. You do have more roots early on. There is some, like when you have a little tiny plant on top, you do have roots below, but But it really is when you get like that big biomass that you make the big effects. So yeah. So that's the challenge right now. So
Awesome. Question for you, Andrew. As an organic farm, is it difficult to source cost-effective organic cover crop seeds, or do you use your own seed?
Yeah, so I have not been able to find, for example, the oats I found from a neighbor. Otherwise, if we cannot, what the organic regulations are is we need to do what's called a commercial seed search. So we need to look for at least 3 different sources of seed that may be organic, and if we cannot find it, then we can go to conventional seed, as long as it's untreated, non-GMO. So yeah, like I said, I have used a little bit of, for example, just spring wheat seed when we were going in after onions and you just want something. It's, grab it from the bin and go. Like Scott said, some of these times it's more about getting some seed out, and I've adapted a little bit too. I previously would kind of throw it 120 pounds and it would cost you, $140 an acre. And it's kind of like, well, that's not necessary either, right? Just keep the cost down. Like I said, oats and peas are, for me, the bulk. The oats are relatively cheap. The peas maybe not as much. These are maple peas, like the little guys. But yeah, just don't go too excessive. And sometimes it's more about just getting a seed in the ground. So use what's locally available if you can. If you can use your own seed, even better, I think. Sometimes there might be need for other species, but definitely, I think, I like diversity, but not at huge economic cost of some of these really unique things. I don't know. I just don't think it's necessary.
Sure. One other question for you, Andrew. Are you using gypsum every year on your soil?
Not every year. I've done a couple of smaller applications of micronized gypsum through the pivot. And the other thing is we have done one application of more of a raw type product at about that 800 to 1,000 pounds an acre. Hard to know on results yet. I'm on the fence. I'm not applying currently. So I have a thing with like irrigation water being high bicarbonates. I think there's a detrimental, it's grown southern Alberta, but at the same time, all of that high bicarbonate water, I think, has a somewhat of a negative effect that we should be aware of. I don't really know what to do, but yeah, so kind of the calcium link. We don't have hugely high sulfur numbers, so maybe you go to some elemental sulfur, but I'm not really sure on the end result if it's a true positive or not on that one.
No, for sure. And it looks like we just got one more question. Again, Andrew, do you use irrigation for your cover crop blend during the growing season or only after the end, after you've killed it?
Yeah, we definitely do. So typically, if we do a tillage pass in May prior to seeding, then yes, we're giving it some water to get it coming, depending on the year. But yeah, definitely giving it, I would say generally probably 4 to 6 inches for that initial crop, depending on the year. But I would say that's maybe with some rain, 4 to 6 inches with 2-3 inches of rain in May, June, kind of call that maybe an average. And then termination, probably about a 3/4 inch to an inch in between, and then again another couple of inches to establish a fall crop. So probably still a easily 10-inch utilization from pivots plus ideally, because if that was all we would get, we'd probably still not have that much biomass. So in like an average year, if you get a couple of inches of rain throughout. So yeah, definitely without the irrigation, it would definitely change that scenario. And so instead of going in with the blend for the fall, some of it we just went in with oats. We gave it the water to get it up, and then we thought, well, this way it's there. If it rains, it'll grow some more. If it doesn't rain, won't grow very much. So yeah, we had various amounts of growth, and still there, just preferring some cover for the winter than nothing. But if we're facing a real dry year, it will probably really make us think about that strategy in general if we're needing to save that water for our veggies.
Okay, there's no more questions. Before I show the CUs, we'll just do some end talking points. Scott, Andrew, do you guys have anything else you want to add before we?
I think I got it.
Yeah, I mean, I think Andrew, you brought up the good point too, is that those mixes and those special species, they, when you start pricing them out, they get pretty expensive pretty fast. So you have to try to figure out whether you're actually going to get your monies back when you start putting those in. So that's why, I think growers are doing it, and I've seen it too. Like, it just, when you try to look at it, I think it's better to have, if you're going to do something, put something out there. Don't worry about trying to get the perfect mix or anything. So, yeah.
No, for sure. Okay, so I'd like to thank everyone that was able to join us today. Special thanks to Scott and Andrew for taking the time to present to all of us here. Please join us again next Monday, February 5th at 11 o'clock, where Trevor Wallace from Alberta Agriculture and Irrigation will present on nutrient management planning, more than calculating application rates. And Mike Gritzner from Farming Smarter will present on effect of biological products on the growth and yield performance of wheat, peas, and canola. Thanks, everybody, and we'll see you next time.